Hello, my name is Diane Marks, and this is my post for Lesson 2 about technology and its progression through the 21st century in education. This first slide is about my belief in technology integration in education, and what I find most compelling about this definition is that it's student-centered and that the technology should become an integral part of how the classroom functions, just like all the other tools. Just like crayons and markers and pens and pencils, laptop computers, the smartboard, all of those things should be used to enhance education and to move it forward. Second, we needed to sort of come up with our own theory about technology and education. And so this is my idea. My idea is that it's a symbiosis, the coevolution of society, education, and technology. I believe that the three are intertwined together and that you cannot separate them, that as one grows, so do the other two. So the first period I want to talk about is the 17th century, and this is colonial America. It was a great time of exploration. It was a very hard time for Americans, but it was also a great time for agriculture and freedom of religion. Interestingly, though, the culture of the time was very strict and puritanical. And so the quote that I use here, I think, says it all in a nutshell, that the main purpose of education was religion and everyday tasks. For the women, that meant housework, and for the men, that meant mostly agriculture. So therefore, usually the tools that they needed at this time were the Bible, the primer, and a horn book. Very simple, because the purpose of education was very simple at this time. So the next period I want to talk about is the 18th century. This is the revolutionary period and the new nation era for our country. It's a time of new thinking and new freedoms. You might remember the Boston Tea Party, the Declaration of Independence. We had the American Revolution at this time. There was a great expansion westward with Lewis and Clark expedition. And then, of course, we had the War of 1812. So there was a lot going on during this 100 years in our nation. Interestingly, school, of course, was affected by the socio-political environment, and English grammar schools were created for the purpose of preparing children, mostly boys, for future careers. Now, it's no longer about religion, and it's no longer about the Bible. Now it's about what they're going to do as a career. And these careers were everything from navigation and engineering to bookkeeping and foreign languages. So this part of the nation really opened up a lot of opportunities for education. Students really needed more than elementary instruction, but they weren't really interested in going to college. So commercial subjects were emphasized over religious ones. And then finally, in the very end of the century, girls were allowed to attend schools. So with this new idea about education, it's education for the future, education for their careers, the technology was starting to expand. They still use the hornbook, the quill, and ink. But coming into the curriculum were tools and documents from the trades. So whatever they needed to teach navigation, bookkeeping, etc., was the technology that they brought in. So this is now the 19th century, and what began as a time of expansion, freedoms, and new thinking in the 18th century continued to boom in the 19th century. This was a great time for civil rights and equal opportunities, the abolitionists, women's suffrage, the Civil War, Reconstruction Acts, 14th and 15th Amendments were all created during this time. And of course, that had a huge impact on the purpose of education. So at this time, in the 19th century, Horace Mann and Henry Barnard in Massachusetts and Connecticut, they began to create what we know today as public schools. And the purpose of education here was to create opportunities for all children. Not just the wealthy children anymore were going to school, but now it was about creating equal opportunities for all of the new immigrants who are in America working on the railroad, for the African Americans who are no longer in slavery, for women who have now been given the vote and are welcome to join schools. So now it's more a democratic idea of education. And the purpose of education has moved again and shifted to preserving social stability and preventing crime and poverty. So now the purpose of education is about citizenship and a better country. And through that, we also had new technologies. It was interesting that at this time, McGuffey introduced the very first textbook, and it was called the McGuffey Reader, of course. And that expanded what everyone was learning, because it was no longer just regional. The textbook could be produced in mass and given out across the country. We used the chalkboard. Again, we still use the Bible and the hornbook, the quill and the ink. So now we've approached the 20th century. And this is early time in American history that many of us remember learning about when we were in school. This is a time when World War I and the Mexican Revolution were going on. Women's rights came into being. There was a great interest in African American culture, and that sort of brought the arts into the norm. Jazz clubs and dancing were huge. The country fell into a depression and then came out of that depression with World War II. And then in the modern era, remember, we had space travel and the Red Scare, as they used to call it. And so here I've used a picture of Sputnik because Sputnik really impacted the educational system. And the purpose at this time of education was more inclusive policies in schools that offered equal opportunities for all students. And then in the second half of the 20th century, it focused on doing it better, on competing globally. We were not happy that Sputnik beat us. And so it sort of turned up the pressure on education. It was very teacher-centered, fact-oriented, and about individual work. So at this time, it was about learning the facts, knowing the facts, and doing it better than anybody else. And so towards that end, it was a very interesting time in technology. The overhead projector, ballpoint pen, standardized testing, scanatrons, calculator, the personal computer, Microsoft Windows, the very first online university, University of Phoenix, was created. The internet started at this time. Smartboards, the very first web browser, Mozilla 1, and then interactive smartboards, and then just whiteboards were also more common in school. So now we're at the 21st century. We're just stepping into the 21st century, and really the future is unknown. And that unknown future is the drive for education today. Some of the socio-political impacts that we've had in education are the flattened world with the rise of China and India as world powers, the birth of the euro, the incredible power of the social media networks, our global recession that we're all still trying to pull out of has also impacted us in education, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the 9/11 terrorist attacks. So with all of these events happening in the past 15 years, what's been the purpose of education? The purpose of education in the 21st century, in this early part of the 21st century, is to really master multiple literacies that are unique to 21st century living and working. These are oral and visual literacies, financial literacy, eco-literacy, media, information technologies, cyber literacy, emotional literacy, physical fitness, health, and global competencies. So these are very distant from learning about the Bible or learning about reading and writing. These are literacies that people will use in careers and jobs and tasks that we haven't even invented or even thought of yet. So the purpose of education has now moved into a more abstract philosophy where we are preparing students for a future that we don't even know what it's going to look like yet. And towards that end, it's moved from being teacher-centered to being more student-centered, because now it's about preparing the students for an unknown future. So we have to really work on their development. Web 2.0 tools have been amazing in this century so far. The smartphone, the tablet, LCD projector, all of those applications or those apps that we use have been fantastic. LMS technologies have really come a long way in this century. They are more and more collaborative, more and more interactive. And then speaking of interaction, I think something that we'll see a lot of on the horizon is the gamification of learning and how we can start to connect the purpose of learning to these games that kids are playing outside of school. So my feeling is that as we move forward with this abstract purpose of education that's centered on our students, technology will continue to develop to support this need. If you want to learn more details about my theory of technology and education and how they all connect together, please click here underneath the magnifying glass, and you will see the chart that I created that shows the data and evidence that I used for this show. And it also has a couple of paragraphs about the symbiosis and the coevolution of society, education, and technology. So you can get some more details about that too. Well, thank you for watching.